Welcome to Discover with Dr. Dan, the Proactive Health Podcast. Today we're talking about women's health, including the importance of openly sharing experiences that in the past were only shared in private and providing actionable information on how our female listeners can improve their health. On the show today is April Davis, an expert on all things women's health and especially the vagina. April, it's great to have you here with us today.
It's so good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for taking time to talk with us. So let's just jump right into it. Tell us your experience about what made you passionate in being an advocate for women's health and, all these things that might have been taboo back in the day, the vagina, menstruation, breastfeeding, pelvic floor exercises.
Mm-hmm. So I have a background in emergency medicine,
okay,
and which led me to working with a certified nurse midwife,
okay,
which is a nurse practitioner essentially, right,
mm-hmm.
with expertise in midwifery, doing home birth. She owns a birth suite here where I live, and then also does home deliveries. And so I got on as her birth assistant. And after working and doing that for a while, I also started taking my own clients as a doula.
Uh-huh.
And I have 3 children of my own as well. So I'd already kind of been on my own journey with breastfeeding and pregnancy and learning everything there was to know about all of that.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's really where my foundations come from. Cindy, the midwife I worked for, was also our nurse practitioner at Planned Parenthood here in St. George at the time. And so not only was I, getting to talk to her nonstop about birth, but talking to her a bit about just female body health in general, what she was seeing and, her practice. And so I just really fell in love with all of it. I've always had such a natural curiosity towards these things anyway.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, I love it. And when I decided to retire from birth work, I just felt such a strong desire to share everything I'd learned. And that's when I created the Vagina blog.
Wow. Cool. So, a lot of these topics back in the day, and really not that long ago, were taboo, right? You wouldn't talk about it on social media. Yeah. You wouldn't even talk about it with your family. Maybe when you had some girlfriends together and you're talking, you would talk about some of these things. So what do you think is the importance of actually talking about these in the open publicly?
Oh, it's when we air things out, when we talk about them, it changes things. And we need to talk about these things. These are very important, crucial elements to healthy, happy living. Mm-hmm. Having a difficult sex life or not choosing, breastfeeding can be so challenging. Breastfeeding is a perfect example because after I had my first, I had forceful letdown. I didn't even know what that was. Mm-hmm. The internet was not what it is today. I was having a hard time. And I'm so grateful that I had someone that I could reach out to and say, what is going on? Mm-hmm. Why is this happening? Because my daughter would latch on and then she would bite me and then she would rip off and I'd spray all over the place. I mean, the whole thing was just like, what am I doing?
That must have been frustrating.
Very. And I'm so glad that I had resources available to me to talk to. And the more we talk about these things, the more we realize that we can reach out to our friends, we can reach out to our moms and our sisters, and this stuff shouldn't be taboo like it is. It really is part of life.
Right.
Like any other part of your life, it's important. So I just think talking about it is really important.
Yeah. I mean, it's biology, right? And it's natural. So breastfeeding, you brought that up. For our women listeners that are struggling with breastfeeding, what are some of the tips and advice that you would give them?
Reach out to someone, get in touch with a lactation consultant or your midwife, or maybe even your friend that has breastfed many babies way before you're at the point of wanting to quit. Do it as soon as problems arise. I think that's the issue is breastfeeding can be very frustrating because once it becomes difficult, once there's injury to you or the baby, once there's, any of this stuff becomes too difficult, you suddenly now have a baby that's really hungry, and that doesn't last very long before you decide to quit. And so I would just say at the first sign of any issues, get help.
Okay. Yeah. Previously on the podcast, we had an epigeneticist who talked about epigenetics and how the change in your DNA can change things in your life. And he talked about nature versus nurture, so children who are loved and cared for, even in their infancy, which includes breastfeeding, were actually better as they grew up, right? They were more loving, they were more productive. And so that's really interesting. You know, these things that we do in infancy with our children have a big impact, big deal.
Oh, 100%. I actually, so nature versus nurture fascinates me because I am adopted. I was taken from my mother. I was a C-section baby. I've never had a drop of breast milk, right? And given to foster care and then passed on to my parents. And then as an adult, got to go back and meet my biological family. It is the most interesting thing. So I love epigenetics. All of that's fascinating.
How cool was that? Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. That's awesome. So you do a lot with the Vagina, obviously, the Vagina blog podcast. What are some general things you would tell us about the vagina?
You know, we have these weird beliefs around the vagina that, you know, like, for example, I always love, Ina Gaskin says, your body is not a lemon. So many people think that pregnancy, birth, all of this is going to ruin their vagina and their vulva, and it's all going to be so messed up. Or like intercourse over time, it's going to stretch you out and mess you up. And I love, there's a meme going around of shriveled up hot dogs, and they're like, these penises had too much sex. Look how withered away and shriveled they are. You know, just to prove the point, like these are beliefs we have around the vagina that gets, you know, bigger or stretched out or all this other stuff. No, vaginas were made for intercourse. Vaginas were made to have babies.
Right.
All of these things, like just like a penis can be flaccid and then become erect. That same thing happens internally, but because we can't see it, we don't believe it like we do when it comes to the penis. And so I always want to make sure that people know their bodies are normal. Their bodies are made do these biological things, and it's not going to ruin them. It's not going to, you know, do anything to them.
Wow. That's amazing. And I bet that's empowering for these women.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would really hope so. Cause it is, you know, I feel like as girls and just people in general with vaginas, as they go through, maturation, as they mature, right? Puberty, for boys, it's empowering. Yay, I have hair on my testicles. Yay, I'm growing. Yay, I have sweat and I wear deodorant and everything's getting bigger and hairier. And like, this is so manly. My voice is changing. Like, they love it. It's like this really empowering superhero moment.
Right.
For girls, it's like, and you're going to bleed, which is super messy and like really gross. And you're going to get boobs, but keep them put away because that's inappropriate. And you're going to grow all this hair, but get rid of it as soon as you possibly can because that's gross. Like, it's really a difficult time. And I really want to flip that on its head and try and change that into being just as empowering as it is for boys.
Right.
You know, and so I think the more that we can educate in a positive light, we live in such a, I don't love using the word patriarchal, but we live in a society that is patriarchal. It praises a lot of masculine qualities. And I'm ready to start praising feminine qualities and really counter that. It's not that masculinity is bad. It's that that's not my fight.
Right.
That's not the game I need to be playing, you know, and those aren't always my strengths. I have many masculine strengths, but I'm really here for starting to develop my feminine strength and seeing that in others and building that up as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. I have a gorgeous wife and 3 wonderful daughters, and I'm on board with you there. Right. We need to empower women. You know, as a scientist, you know, I'm passionate about having women go into STEM, you know, and my daughters, you know, I had an interesting experience when my oldest daughter, who's 18 now, when she was in first grade, you know, and they kind of talked about what you wanted to be career wise and whatnot. And she said she wanted to be a scientist. And her teacher, after the class, actually pulled her aside and said that women don't go into science. You should actually do English or humanities or something like, you know, and that made me livid. Right. I mean, there's no limit to what we can do, women and men. Right. I mean, so we need to empower women and let them know that they could do anything that they want. So I love that. And I love the mission of what you're doing there.
Yeah. But even beyond that, I think sometimes, once again, like shifting women into like, you can be a scientist and you can be a doctor and you can be all these types of things. It still is praising them for what they can be, which is very masculine.
Good point.
See, these are inherent. This is stuff that we don't even realize we're doing it sometimes because it is so deeply ingrained in our culture.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Very enlightening, mind blowing. Boom. I think that's something our listeners right now, who will be listening to this, I think this is something they'll find fascinating. Oh, that's amazing.
Well, I was teasing a friend of mine, and because so many of the slurs that men say to each other that I would say are inappropriate typically have to do with the vagina or with females. And or verbs that females do, that men like when females do, right? But for some reason, they throw them each other as slurs. And I pointed this out to him, and it completely blew his mind. I would dare bet most men like vaginas. Why are they calling their friends that as a bad word?
Yeah. Interesting.
So there's a lot of these types of things that are they're so ingrained. And then when you call it out, it's like, oh, wait, what?
Yeah. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about menstruation, right? You just mentioned it, and menstruation is obviously a big deal. It's part of life. For a lot of women, it's very difficult. It lays them out for several days. What thoughts or advice would you have for our women listeners on menstruation? About knowledge, general knowledge, empowerment, maybe things that you can do while menstruating. What are your thoughts there?
So this is like such a perfect segue because we're already kind of talking about this. So once again, culture, very masculine. If you go outside and you look up at the sky during the day, what do you see? The sun,
Blue,
right?
The sun.
And he's in the same spot. He goes across the sky at the same time every single day. He rises in the east, he sets in the west. And it's the same thing every single day. So 24-hour cycle, we know what the sun's going to do. Now, if you go outside at night and you look up at the sky, where is the moon? What size is she? Where is she? Is she even there? Or is she resting? Right? Women are the moon. So men, their hormone cycle is 24 hours, right? Predictable. You're the same person every single day hormonally. Women hormonally are only the same 12 days a year. And when you start to embrace that and realize like, okay, I'm a different critter. I need to treat myself differently. I love using the U.S. women's soccer team as an example. A couple of years ago, they decided to start tracking all of their players' menstrual cycles. And instead of just having them train hard every single day and do the exact same thing every single day, essentially training them like men, they started training them differently depending on where they were at in their cycle. They gave them different supplements depending on where they were at. They had them sleep more or less depending on where they were at. And then they took the World Cup.
Interesting.
And so what they have found is, I love using the seasons to compare to your cycle. So we have winter, which is when you're menstruating, right? That's when you want to hibernate. So you want to sleep. It's when you want to eat warming foods, rest. Like you want to take it easy. You go straight into there to spring, from there to spring. And that's your follicular phase. This is as we're leading up into ovulation. This is a great time to train hard, to do lift hard or lift heavy, train hard and do cardio, and push yourself. Typically, you don't need quite as much sleep. You're going to want to eat lighter. Ovulation's the same way. And then we head into our luteal phase, which is in preparation for menstruating. And that luteal phase is that week before. Most people go through an existential crisis at this point. They question all of their life's choices. This is when we would, classify as PMS, right? And so we go through this luteal phase, which can be really not fun and nasty. But if you plan on it, if you know that this is just part of your cycle and your life, and you start to accommodate for it, there is so much peace that comes. And it's fantastic to say, okay, right now I rest. Right now I take a break, because I know that next week I'm going to feel amazing and I'm going to hit it super hard. And they have found this physically to be true. They found this mentally to be true. And it's hard because it is such a different way of living from go, 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 push, 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 very masculine. But the more that I'm like diving into that, the more that I'm trying to nurture this, the healthier and happier I am.
Yeah.
And I see that across the board. I have a whole talk that I do about this, and I did it at Alt Summit. And one of the other presenters came up to me and said, oh yeah, we have an Excel spreadsheet for my entire office. She's an all-female office. She plays to their strengths throughout the month. So it's, oh, you're ovulating, cool. You're going to do our Instagram stories this week. Oh, you're in your luteal phase. Perfect. You're in deep thinking mode. I need you to think through this project and, find out what we're going to do next with this and think about this. And, caters to that like hibernation phase and then caters to that ovulation, that wanting outgoingness. And
wow,
it was the coolest thing to find out someone had really implemented this. And I think even women, as they hear this, will oftentimes bristle and be like, no, anything a man can do, I can. But the reality is, if you step out of that lane and into this one, there's so much peace. There's so much peace in it. There's so much strength. And so just doing that alone, I feel like helps quite a bit. And beyond that, I love the book, The Period Repair Manual.
Okay.
It is a fantastic resource if you are suffering from horrible periods. That one's a great one. Getting away from tampon use is always a good idea. Tampons are very inflammatory and not super good for your body. Typically, once you get away from them, your periods will shorten, pain will subside. Like it's incredible as I have people come back to me and say, oh my gosh, they switched to a cup or period panties or to literally anything else and had so many things go better. So.
Interesting. So I love what you're talking here. The second part of the title of this podcast is the Proactive Wellness Podcast, right? And you have proactive health and you have reactive health. And that's a lot about what you're talking here is being proactive, right? Doing things beforehand, having knowledge and knowing what to do and how to prepare. I love that. I also love what you were saying about, performance based on, the phases of the ovulation cycle. That's really cool. It's a personalized performance, for lack of a better word. Really cool.
Yeah. And we don't know enough about this. These are the things that I wish they taught in school. Yeah. I don't understand why they don't. The only thing we get is like, oh, you're going to bleed once a month and it's going to suck.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the, I'm going to summarize maturation. That's what you get at fifth grade,
Right. Interesting. So we talked about PMS. PMDD is also a huge issue, that affects a lot of women.
Yep.
And that can be, you can go into the pit there, right? Into the canyon, and it's hard to come out.
Definitely. And it's, for people I know that have it, some of them have done medication. I'm such an advocate for zinc and magnesium as part of just a daily supplement. Like those alone will change your menstrual cycle, and period, and for the better. And your skin, I mean, it helps with so many things. But beyond that, some of my friends that have PMDD, they just know they have it. Yeah. They just know that that's not going to be a good week, and they just have to kind of map their life out around it. There's a lot of things that they have done to improve, but ultimately, sometimes you just have to say, you know what, once a month, I just get to rest for 3 days, and that just has to be it.
Right. Oh, again, right. Being proactive, taking care of your health. I love how you said supplementation, right? A lot of people think supplementation is for other things, right? It can't help with women's health, especially menstruation. I love how you say zinc and magnesium.
Yes, minimum. Zinc and magnesium, minimum. Supplementation is a game changer. I'm managing my PCOS through supplements.
Yeah.
I'm ovulating regularly because of supplements. It frustrates me because we don't often give supplements the value that they really deserve.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I have women in my family. I love them. I'm a formulator, right? And so I was really excited. We developed a formula that was supposed to help with brain fog, cognition, natural energy, no caffeine. But one of the interesting things we found is this supplement significantly reduced PMS. You usually go into kind of that valley and you come up when it comes to mood, depression, and all these other things. And we found that it basically eliminated that in a lot of women. And so supplementation is a big deal, right? I mean, a lot of people say, well, just nutrition and exercise, right? Eat healthy and exercise and you're okay. Well, that assumes we live in a perfect world, right? That there's no stress, that there's no lifestyle factors. And so I love how you say that. Supplementation is one of the legs of a three-legged stool that can help us. And it's cool to hear you say that, related to menstrual health and other women's health issues.
Yeah, no, it's huge. That's what's hard. We're combating more environmental factors than humans ever have. It makes complete sense to me that we would need to be supplementing.
Right. Very cool. So let's talk about yeast infections. That's a big deal for women. Are there things that you've seen that we can do? Recurring yeast infections can be a big deal. What are your thoughts there?
There's a couple different things. Always work with your care provider, and that comes with hire a good care provider in the first place, and then make sure you're staying on top of those things with your care provider. I'm a huge fan. So I myself went through a really, really nasty yeast infection that I tried pharmaceutical drugs on and everything, could not get rid of. And it really took changing my diet in order to get rid of it. And so it may come to that. It's hard because people don't want to hear that, especially for something as simple as a yeast infection, that you might have to change your diet. But the reality is yeast feeds on sugar, and anything that metabolizes the sugar. And if you stop eating those things, the yeast dies.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you brought up diet, right? I mean, a lot of people, don't know, right, that diet can directly influence all these things, breastfeeding, menstruation, PCOS, yeast infections. Women's health, a lot of it starts in the kitchen. So I love how you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's a balanced diet will only help you in every single way. And eating healthfully, which I think we can all agree, just eat more vegetables. There's all different versions of diet. Just eat more vegetables.
Right.
That's what we all need.
Well said. So you talk about finding a good health provider. How would you go about doing that?
Interview.
Oh, okay.
You need to interview them. And you also, you need someone you can trust. Sometimes I feel bad for my doctor because he has to put up with me. But as I was interviewing doctors, my first family doctor that I adored retired. And I was like, what am I going to do? Because I'm particular about how things go and also how open they are. I want a care provider who will sit and talk with me about all the things and will go over everything, and who will be straightforward with me about why they want to do what they want to do. And I'm so grateful that I took the time to do that, because so my daughter has type 1, and when she went through diagnosis, having him show up at the hospital to help oversee her care was so comforting, because I already had a relationship of trust with him. I was scared. I was so scared in the situation. It was a horrible emergency, and I needed someone I really could trust making her care decisions at that point. And I was so grateful that he and we already had that relationship. So the frustration that I'm seeing here in the United States in particular is that we have a lot of care providers who aren't willing to explain themselves, or just they really get caught up in well, that's what I told you to do, so that's what you're going to do.
Right.
And so I'm a big fan of, when you start having the discussions about maybe birth control with your doctor, make sure they explain the side effects, make sure they explain what's happening, make sure that they answer your questions. Because I feel like if we can start having the birth control conversations and getting some transparency maybe around that, ideally, then we're going to be seeing better care in birth. Yeah. Because right now, our maternal mortality rates are going up, meaning we have more people dying in childbirth today than when our moms had babies, which is insane. And that has a lot to do with the lack of transparency, lack of consent, too much intervention, and just in general, doctors not being as invested in their clients, or being so overloaded with clients that they're not providing optimal care.
Right.
We have to demand more. We pay way too much for our healthcare not to.
Oh, wonderful. And I like how you say interview, right? A lot of times we think that when we go to a doctor, we're locked into them, right? And that we can't get out, that, we have to, grin and bear it if it's, someone that we don't particularly like, whatnot. We don't think we can go to someone else.
When people are pregnant, I think they get really caught up in that one where it's well, I started with this guy for my pregnancy, and it's no, that's the perfect time to fire your doctor. Yeah. Find a new one. Find any you want someone that you trust, because especially when it comes to having babies, you need someone that you 100% trust to make the best decisions for you, because they may end up cutting you open at some point, whether it's your midsection or your vagina.
Yeah.
You need someone that you 100% trust before you let them do those things.
Yeah. Makes sense. Right. And so that's good to know. I think that, it's empowering our listeners. So you talked about contraceptives a little bit, right? And you were talking about the shift, right, with masculinity and whatnot. It's really cool to see that in the clinic, right, you have the pill for women. It's cool to see that pharmaceuticals are trying to develop the pill for men, and I think that's really interesting.
I'm interested to see. Here's what's difficult because contraceptive drugs are terrible for you, right? It's not super good for you. And as much as I would love to see men carry the load, right, of the birth control, it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to go mess up their hormones as well.
Yeah.
Like I would much prefer we find better ways other than contraceptive drugs for both, genders, rather than be like, well, we've been doing pills, so now you get to,
Right. Interesting. So we've been talking a lot about women's health and obviously what women can do to be proactive. But, a lot of our listeners are men, right? And so as men, what are some things that we can do to support the special women in our lives?
I think taking ownership in birth control and the birth control decisions and being an active participant in that is huge. As soon as we decided we were done with kids, it really wasn't a question whether or not my husband was getting a mastectomy. Mm-hmm. He just was like, you've been carrying this burden for so long. Of course I'm getting a mastectomy. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a lot of discussion around that. And I think, realizing too that I have so many friends who've been on birth control for 10, 20 years. Mm-hmm. Have had side effects from it the entire time. And not once has their male partner been like, we could try something else. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be miserable for 10 solid years. Mm-hmm. So I think having some ownership in the birth control realm definitely helps. I think supporting your partner in general as they go throughout, their cycle and things like that also makes a big difference as well. And then I always love seeing partners take an interest through pregnancy and delivery and being hands-on parents, Oh,
I love that. It reminds me, one of the principles for success in life is communication, right? A lot of times conflict and anger, and those things start by not accurately communicating. And so I like what you're saying, and I think a lot of that relates to communication, right? Being open with your spouse about menstruation, about breastfeeding, about pregnancy, and some of the challenges there.
Yeah. And it's things like breastfeeding too. I feel like for me as a wife and a partner, I needed so much support. Mm-hmm. I needed someone being like, you are doing a good job. Thank you for breastfeeding our kids. I know it's hard on you and I see you and I appreciate you, and I support whatever decisions you make around how it comes to feeding our children. Right. I was so grateful for that. It was so needed. And I think too, opening up those avenues of communication when it comes to sex and intimacy.
Yeah.
We need to be talking with our partners more about our sex lives. And we need to have a comfortable place to do that where people aren't getting their feelings hurt or getting overly offended and being really real about what we do and do not want from our sex lives. That changes. That changes throughout the course of a relationship. That changes depending on the season that you're in, whether you are going through pregnancy or postpartum or breastfeeding or depression or a death in the family or health problems or, that all changes. And so if your partner is not willing to speak up about your sex life, take them to lunch and you be the one willing to speak up about your sex life.
I love that. Yeah. It all comes down to communication. That's healthy for relationships, 100%. For societies, for the world, and, as a whole. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. So April, this has been so fun talking with you. The information you've given has been amazing. We sure appreciate it. What final comments or advice would you leave with our listeners? We've talked about a lot of things. Are there some key points you want to drive home, things that you haven't talked about that you'd like to? What advice would you give?
I would just tell people, if you're unsatisfied with your sex life, it can change. If you're unsatisfied with your period and how difficult it is, it can change. And you should never fake orgasms. Ever. Just don't do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been amazing, April. It's been a lot of fun to talk about you with these topics and, communication. I love it. I love that we've been able to talk about some of these things. I think it will empower our listeners because, again, we're talking about proactive health. So empowering our listeners, both the male and female listeners on this show. This has been amazing. So April, sure appreciate you being on the show. It's a delight, and I wish you and your family the very best.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to our dear listeners for tuning in. We sure appreciate you. If you like this show, please leave a review. And we're grateful to be with you on this journey as we talk about several topics. And today, women's health. It's been amazing. Hope you found it helpful. Thank you, my friends. Thanks for listening. This is Dr. Dan, signing off.